My name is Kelsey, but you can call me KELS, and you are listening to the Queer in Alberta podcast. Dang, that feels good to say after a few months.
What's your story? What's your sign? It's like we're twin flames in a different life.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Queer in Alberta, the podcast where I talk to Albertans from all kinds of backgrounds, genders, races, and sexualities to share their stories. My name is Kelsey. I am a queer Filipino-Canadian. I use she, her pronouns. I feel like we can't get into this episode without addressing the over 3-4 month, possibly more, lack of updating elephant shape in the room. I am so sorry, my friends, that it has been so long since our last episode. But if you've been following around since episode 1, you'll be familiar with my journey with TELUS Story Hive. So I wasn't just ghosting everybody, I promise. I was away filming 7 different episodes that I am so proud to announce will be available on TELUS Optic TV Channel 9 on September 19th. If you are not in Canada, you can go to Story Hive on YouTube, just search that in the search bar, and you will be able to see what I've been working on for the past few months since I've not been updating. I am so excited about those episodes, my friends. It was just the most incredible journey, and I feel so lucky to have been able to have the conversations that I did. And drum roll, we got a season 2. That's also a first announcement here on the podcast. I love this work, and just thank you so much for supporting me. So even though I was away filming for Story Hive, I did actually do a few other episodes in my kind of pre-production phase. One of those episodes was with Makaylah Rogers, who uses she, they pronouns. Hey besties, it is me from July 2023 in the future. Within the last few days, Makaylah announced that they are officially using they, them pronouns. Congratulations, Makaylah, and I am so excited to see where this journey continues to take you. And they are living in the Bow Valley and are one of the co-owners of Frankie D's Donuts. Now, this is a donut company that is not average. It does a little bit more than your regular run-of-the-mill place. If you're from Red Deer, yes, that was a donut mill reference. I did my best. But they are aiming to serve up donuts and conversations about mental health, creating safe spaces for folks to bring whatever it is to the table, whether it's maybe something they're struggling with or maybe questions about queerness and gender identity. This was a really powerful conversation to have as Makaylah and I were speaking in the wake of the Valbella Meats incident that took place in the Bow Valley, which if you're not from Alberta, the Bow Valley is like this area that comprises Canmore, Banff, the Rocky Mountains. Catmore Pride had reached out to them asking if they would be interested in supporting Pride by donating, I believe, burgers. One of the owners sent a deeply transphobic email back that not only said they were uninterested, but shared the business's views on transgender folks and queer identifying individuals of the community. This made national news here in Canada. The Bow Valley business community rose up, canceled branding partnerships as a way of saying this is not acceptable and does not reflect the community that we strive to build. Makaylah and I have a conversation in the aftermath of that. We learn a few insights about allyship, performative allyship, and cancel culture. Now, I do have to say, my friends, that for this episode, I will be providing a trigger warning. We do get into some really heavy themes involving suicide, trauma, and childhood trauma. These are elements of Makaylah's story that really, I think, also form the foundation of why mental health and advocacy surrounding mental health is so important to them. This is the trigger warning that these are some of the themes that we will be encountering together in the space. But without further ado, here is Makaylah and their episode about Frankie D's and life as a queer person in the Bow Valley.
I'm Makaylah Rogers. My pronouns are she, they. I'm here on the traditional lands of the Treaty 7 people and their territory. And I just want to acknowledge, we're privileged to be on this land. I live in the mountains and it's absolutely gorgeous. And that privilege has come at a huge loss and enormous trauma for Indigenous peoples. And yeah, I just want to acknowledge that before we get started. I own 2 businesses, Frankie D's Donuts and a business consulting company called Scale Naturally.
I'm going to read a little bit of your email submission that you sent to me all the way back in February, my goodness. So it says, I'm queer in Canmore and have 2 businesses with my wife. Our latest is Frankie D's Donuts, and we spread love with our donuts and mental health and diversity awareness. Just hearing that, I am so curious about how you're serving up all of these different things together in the Canadian Rockies.
Yeah, so Frankie D started in the middle of the pandemic. My wife had her business for 18 years. I'd been a part of it for 6 years. And our background was like business and consulting. That's what we knew. And we are not bakers, so donuts was like never in the plan for us. Like I wanted to build a brand that I could talk about mental health and advocate for mental health, talk about trauma and like all the things that kind of have stigma surrounded about them, but create conversation. Out of nowhere, Frankies Donuts was born. Frankie D is our dog. She's a goofy Labradoodle. So what I loved is like she's the mascot and she's the face of it, and we're kind of like the moms behind the scenes, which people have grown to really love. It gave people something to look forward to, and they would come and pick up their donuts and they would tell us stories about what's going on in their life. They would bring us into important moments and memories because we talked about mental health a lot on our social media. On Sundays, we do something called Together Sundays, and we do check-ins, we give mental health reminders, we learn together. So we bring up something like trauma or anxiety or depression or gender identity and expression, and we start talking about it so that we can all be learning together to become higher quality people. I then joined the board for the local, what we call Canmore Pride, the local pride organization. And I'm excited for where Frankies Donuts is going because we're actually testing this next month in November an experience we've created that has people connect over their donuts. And it's kind of like the donuts are acting as a conduit for connection. We're really excited. We're testing it with a few of our like big fans and then hopefully releasing it to the public next year.
That is so cool. And who would have thought that donuts would just be this like community conduit for support and storytelling? Like that's fantastic.
Our values are not just words, like they're actions and behaviors that our community can hold us accountable to, but it's also how we make our donuts. So one of our big values is deep care and love. And there's certain things that we do in how we make our donuts to ensure that that is going in, is poured into those donuts. And when someone takes a bite out of it, we want them to feel that love. We want them to feel that they belong just as the donuts do. And we don't throw any donuts out, even if they look a little bit different than the others, because everything's hand cut and handmade. It's a symbol for how, even if we look different, we have different belief, sexuality, anything, like it's not a reflection on a difference in worth or value. What we're doing is seeing that the people that are consuming the donuts are being inspired to also take on similar values. And that's really cool to see.
Making me get a little hungry because I went to the gym this morning and just had a snack in between. Next time in Canmore, I'm definitely going to pop by.
Definitely, yeah.
And when you talk about though, this passion is really just coming through the screen when I'm hearing your voice and when you're speaking for mental health in particular, where does that driver for you come from that you really want to talk about these issues and bring some light to them?
Yeah, so for me, I've struggled with mental illness my whole life. I remember being really, really young and having my first thoughts of suicide. I suffered a lot of trauma. I felt very isolated. I had depression, anxiety all throughout my life. I had multiple suicide attempts, and actually the shirt I'm wearing, To Write Love, on her arms. They're a nonprofit that advocates for mental health and especially like suicide awareness and gives tools and resources, and they're incredible. But I grew up in Australia, even though I've lost my accent completely. Somehow I found them when I was a teenager, and it really started to help kind of pull me out because I was isolated. I didn't have anyone to talk to. There's such a stigma in the world. There's just so much shame. I've been in therapy now for I think 6 or 7 years, which is helping to kind of unravel that shame and the trauma. But just with mental health alone, there's so much stigma about talking about it.
Everything you're saying is just like, I feel it right here. I can't remember the exact statistics or anything like that, but I know for a fact that several studies have been done on how queer youth and queer people are at such a higher rate of being subjected to things like mental health and mental illnesses.
When I was here in Alberta, because I moved from Australia, and I was like, just saw the mountains, and I was like, this is the best place ever. I saw like a pride sticker on a few windows. I was like, wow, this is awesome. I didn't know we were like living in like Texas, you know, but in Canada, like And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't feel so safe anymore. Go online. All you have to do is go in the Facebook like community page or online, and it's just like
Messy.
where the shame adds up, right? It's like we take in these messages even if you try not to, and it just like sticks in our mind as there's something shameful about us.
That actually touches on something that I was going to ask you, because I can't remember if I've shared this in our emails or not, but I actually lived in Banff for 3 summers. Yeah, I loved it. I used to work for Parks Canada as a heritage interpreter. So the cute little uniform running all around the park. And it was fantastic. I think about it often and miss it. But at that time, I was out with my coworkers. At the time, I was dating long distance, so I didn't really look for a queer community in like the mountain towns while I was there. So what are your experiences? You're talking about some fears about being open in those spaces.
Like when I moved here in 2015, I don't think we were actually a part of, no, we weren't. We didn't know any other queer people or were a part of any queer community until we started Frankie D's Donuts. The first kind of friends we made, we do these donut days and people come and pick up their donuts. And these 2 people came and introduced us to their new dog, and they're friends now. And they told us that when they met us, they were like, okay, 2 moms and their dog, because that's what's on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, are they friends or are they like together? Because they were also looking and like for a queer community.
Yeah.
They came to pick up and I had my hat on backwards and they were like, oh, cool.
Hey.
Yeah. And they told us this later and it's just so hilarious. Like, I don't like when other people stereotype us, but we can for ourselves.
Exactly it, 100%. And like how funny, like it just takes one person to kind of like put themselves out there and then the community starts to form a little bit.
Yeah, you're right. And I didn't, I guess, see it like that. And for me, it was the first time I was wearing my hat backwards because like I didn't come out until like I met my wife. Like it was, yeah. So it was I had so much shame. I convinced myself all my life, like, don't be gay, don't be gay, don't be gay, don't be gay. And so if it wasn't for her actually telling me how she felt about me, we might still be best friends. Like I've been like figuring out my sexuality, my identity. Like I came out as non-binary, and like, so even the experience of putting a hat on backwards or wearing like a chain, like they've all been really big for me to start knowing my own identity rather than what I was told to be, and just the message inside my head that like, don't be that, don't be that.
Just as you were talking about that feeling of putting a hat on backwards and wearing a chain, like, isn't it amazing those little joys that we get to have in expressing our identity when we get to that point where we allow ourselves to? So coming out as non-binary, this whole journey you're on, like, I just want to say that's awesome.
Thank you. It's been a wild journey. Yeah, just little by little. Like my hair was always long and I'd go to the hairdressers and be like, you can only cut off the dead parts.
Oh yeah.
It was like, it must be long because that's what it means to be feminine. This year is the first time I finally cut all my hair off and I just feel like more free than ever. So shopping in the men's section for the first time only happened like a month ago and was totally terrifying. So I'm definitely like not at the end of this journey. I'm in that messy middle part where we're just figuring it all out. I think that starting Frankie D's, and it was a choice we made of like, are we going to put ourselves out there and say that we are 2 moms and a dog? Because it was terrifying. Like we hadn't really done anything in the community until that point. It's been really cool to like find other queer people that are customers and then getting to meet each other. I do feel more of a sense of community now that there are people, and just seeing the people that have our back. And when I post anything on Instagram, Pride related, Indigenous related, anything like that, and I lose followers, initially I thought I took on the shame. But now my wife is like, this is the best news ever, because our audience is only supportive of this, which means that's the environment we're creating for everyone else too. And I really love that. Like I see the value of that now.
And I like what you said. Well, I don't like what you said about shame, but I think it's really relatable because sometimes even I've experienced it, you know, when you're open and then you lose followers or whatever it is, and you do take on that, like, am I doing something wrong kind of feeling. But I think in the crudest way of saying it, really, it's like you're just weeding out what doesn't need to be there. If this is not going to be a space that can be safe and foster community for people like us, then what are we doing, right?
Totally, yeah. I went to this, there's a company called Bow Valley DI, and they do trainings for businesses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Absolutely incredible. In the workshop, I had a question for Aurora, who's the facilitator and created these workshops. And I said, so when I get hate comments on Instagram and like homo and like all this stuff that is put on there, what do I do? Like, I feel like for me, I was like, do I fight back so people see? And her response was, you delete it. Even hearing or seeing it is damaging. And I totally feel that, because I should really not be on the internet looking at stuff in the community when other people are saying stuff, because it goes in and it just like sits there and it grows. If we can really be a place where you don't see any of that stuff anywhere near us, I think it creates more of that sense of belonging for the people that really need it.
It's such a tricky thing, because I think deleting it is a good thing to do for that exact reason. Like, if I'm a young person on the internet following this amazing donut account that I adore, and I start to see these comments, then it kind of makes that question of, is there something wrong with me again, right? Yeah. I think there is value in discourse on challenging things and trying to maybe meet someone with a different perspective, but there's also different spaces to do that.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. It's like you really need to look at every situation and kind of look at it from the different angles of who might be seeing this.
Whether it's just because of what we've gone through as queer people, we all are so protective of one another, and especially of queer youth.
Yeah, it's like we have our own inner child or teenage self in our mind and what we wish someone would have done for us.
Absolutely. I'm gonna circle us back a little bit to talking about your business. It sounds like when you talk about coming with stories and people meeting you with their own stories, what kind of things are they telling you about?
You know, I keep it very close, the confidentiality of what people share with us, but in a broad thing, it's kind of like they'll bring us into moments where people are passing. They'll share memories with us or how they connected. They'll talk about their mental health, and people like send their story in and what their struggles are. And on Out Together Sundays, we check in, we ask questions, and people are responding to Frankie about what they're feeling, what's going on in their life. And they're just receiving a lot of love and validation back. Like, Frankie responds to every single message, and we're talking about gender, we're talking about sexuality, we're talking about trauma, we're talking about all the things that people don't want to talk about. What we're finding is that when you introduce donuts into the conversation, it's like our walls come down a little and we're ready to have conversations we maybe wouldn't have before.
I think it's so impressive that you and your wife saw this need from your own experiences and then created this movement, honestly, based around donuts. But I can't help but be curious, because it sounds like a lot of this journey with your business and, you know, the topics you're talking about with gender affirmation and identity and in all its forms really seems to go in parallel with your own individual journey in accepting yourself. Has that been like maybe kind of empowering or surprising? Like, how has that been for you?
Yeah, it is. It's all of those things. I think that when we first started, it was more about mental health. Like, my wife and I both have childhood trauma, and I think we connect on the feeling that we never felt seen. We didn't even know who we were as people, because to survive things like that, you have to be whatever is needed to keep yourself safe. I feel like in our life, we're on this journey to figure out who we actually are and heal from that. For me, I feel like trauma is not talked about very much, especially things like childhood abuse or any form of abuse. It seems like as much as mental illness has stigma, trauma seems to as well, where it's just like, if we don't think about it, then we don't have to deal with it, even though it's happening everywhere. And so that was a main motivation, was like to connect, bring people together, to have people feel seen, and then to have a way to talk about some of these things. So I feel like that's where I started, like anxiety, depression, PTSD, just feeling so isolated, trying to figure out my identity. And then more recently, it's moved into talking about the 2S LGBTQ plus community and all of that. Like, the first video I ever did on that was Catmore Pride 2 years ago, or I think it was Pride Month. I shared a video on our page just talking about the importance of Pride and kind of talking to this whole idea that people are like, why do you need a full month? And why is there not a straight month? And stupid stuff like that.
Yeah, every day straight pride.
Yeah. So just talking about where it comes from for me, that like, okay, there's all of this shame, and you have to realize there's people that haven't come out, and we're just living in shame. And pride is the opposite emotion from shame. I got a lot of feedback from that video that people understood it for the first time. For whatever reason, our following wanted to hear our stories.
With you moving more into just being open and vulnerable and speaking about those topics in relation to your own identity with your platform, do you find that maybe your own relationship and perception with living in Canmore as a queer person is different now than when you first started?
Yeah, for sure. I think like in a good way and sometimes a not so good way. So I think when I first came to Canmore, I had no idea there was a queer community, and I definitely did not like seek one out either. I was still dealing with my own shame of like being queer and like, what did that mean? Like, I remember being with my like now wife, and we're like, wait, does this mean we're gay? Like, I don't understand what's happening. And we'd go and watch YouTube videos because we felt like we don't know anything. Yeah. And so I was definitely like too afraid, because I definitely felt like like imposter syndrome. I thought if I met any other queer person, they'd immediately be like, well, you don't belong here. I felt like, well, I have no idea, and am I even gay? And like, what does that mean? And it's only been over the 6 years that I'm now figuring that out. And sometimes like still in the Catmore Pride board, I'm like, should I be here? Like, it's a weird thing to not be something, like to try and not be something your whole life and then start to like own it. Being in such a transient, like a tourist town is hard, because we don't know who's walking down the streets. It's not just locals, it's like people from all over, and they could be coming from a country where you'd be murdered or thrown in jail for being gay. We definitely still have a hard time holding hands or having any like public affection, because we just don't actually know who is there. It's not completely safe. Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, you heard about the thing that happened recently with the local business, which
I did.
It's all of this up to the surface. Yeah, so that I think opened my eyes more, because on social media, it's great in the way that you're more aware of what's happening in like the US with trans rights and gay rights. I think that because we live in the mountains, sometimes it can appear like this bubble where everything is like awesome and happy, and like inclusivity and diversity is welcome. Yeah, yes, it's beautiful, but the same problems that exist everywhere else exist here too. And I think I was naive to think that they didn't.
Yeah, and like I said, that is absolutely something that I wanted to talk with you about today. You would know better than me, but for those who are listening or watching who maybe aren't familiar, Valbella Meats, it is a local deli and specialty meat shop, right? We're all community regardless of where we are, and so the weight of those words that were sent back to Canmore Pride, I felt them here. And I think when you talk about the ugliness of other places in the world and seeing it in real time in your own community, like it's a shocking feeling. And so even though I wasn't in Canmore, I still felt just as, well, I won't say just as, but I still felt upset and hurt and afraid by seeing that initially.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge that you could have felt it equally as us right here. You know, like it's not just because I live in this town thing. Like, you're in Alberta, you're close, and like I think people found out about it across Canada, and so it impacted a lot of people. And I'm not glad that it happened. I wish it never happened. I wish the words were never said. What I'm glad about is it put the spotlight on and said, this is not an outside issue. Like, this isn't a outside of Canmore or outside of Canada issue. Like, it's an issue right here. And I think that has been good.
Especially in the wake of Black Lives Matter, there was a really big kind of debunking of this myth that racism doesn't exist in Canada. People from minority communities, like even myself, I've experienced racism in my life, whether it's a microaggression or something more confronting and scary and threatening to my safety. It's not news to us that this is still happening, but to the larger population, it's so important that these things, not that they happen, but that we address them and speak on them when they do.
The fact that people do think like, oh, this is a US issue, this is a whatever, it's like so invalidating because you're a living human being right here today in Canada going through shit, you know, like, and that's, I'm glad it's being seen more, and I'm not glad that it's happening at all. It's like, I wish that these things weren't happening. Yeah, like I don't even know how much I really want to say about it, because it's hard to be in the community as a queer person. So I'm experiencing my own trauma resurfacing, my own hurt and my feelings around it. But then I'm also a queer-owned business that people are kind of looking to. And also I'm in a community where, and something I do love about the community is they very much rally together. Like we're like kind of close knit. So it's hard because a lot of people have asked me like, well, are you over it? Or like, can't you forgive them? Like there's stuff in the community pages where everyone, when it first happened, was rallying for the 2S LGBTQ plus community. And now the voices are louder saying, go back to Valbella, eat their food. They made a mistake. They apologize. It's all fine. And so I had someone that lives here locally come up to me and be like, are you going to speak out about this? Like how you feel now after a month or two. And it's been weighing on my mind so much. And maybe by the time this is out there, I don't know. But I did speak out about it when it happened. And I'm still debating whether to speak out about it really now. I feel like when people are telling me like it was a mistake, thankfully I talked to people at Canmore Pride. I've talked to Aurora at Bow Valley DEI processing this, because I felt very disheartened and just the pain was coming up. And I was like, is it all words? But like, why is this just passing by? Like everyone's voices were raised and like, this is outrageous. And now everyone's just going back there. And when I'm kind of asked to forgive, when we're calling it a mistake, that's not accurate. A mistake is misusing someone's pronouns. A mistake is misidentifying someone, or little things like that where you have a good intention, but you kind of messed up. You don't go from transphobic and saying the things that were in that email to I'm an ally. Like these are deep-seated beliefs. Like I'm dealing with my internalized homophobia and I'm 7 years in and I'm still seeing it come up in myself towards myself. So how could someone just change overnight from being totally transphobic to I'm an ally, and now they're back working in the store? What I want to say is that it hurts. Like it just hurts that I'm walking around town knowing that the locals are shopping there saying it's a mistake and let's forgive them and don't be like in the whole cancel culture. What it doesn't recognize and what no one is asking is from people within the queer community how they feel about it. Huge on like redemption and growth. So if to me this had happened and someone was actually like, wow, I have these beliefs that have been here forever and I have serious work to do, and the business did serious work, I'd have different things to say about it. But when it's PR and it's just like, we apologize and we did these DEI things and like we're good now, it hurts.
There is so much there, and I just want to be really receptive of the fact that this is a difficult thing for you to talk about. It's tough when you kind of have a platform and you are a voice in the community, and this is an issue that affects you specifically as that voice. People, of course, are going to be expecting you to step up and speak and be the authority if that's even possible. And I just want to encourage you again to make sure that you set those boundaries for yourself. You do not have to speak on something right instantly when it happens, especially if it's affecting you and something that you carry with you. And I find that often when we do rush into those situations because we feel like we need to, what comes out is not the best.
For sure.
Yeah, I hear you as a fellow, member of the community, and I feel it again. And I totally agree with you in the sense that cancel culture, all of these things, that's one conversation. But in order to come back from something like this, I agree that I would need to see long-term, consistent work being put in, because it's so easy to say, oh yes, I'm an ally, and then just move on from it. But what are you actually doing to be an ally and to honor that statement with the community that you heard?
Yeah, and like, again, it comes back to conversation for me. Like, sit in front of me and let's have a conversation about what that felt like. I may be wrong for sure in a lot of this, but I haven't heard that there has been any conversation with people within the queer community or Canmore Pride. And again, this is like one example in my local town, and this is happening all over the world. And so I just deeply feel for like people in the US, like where something has happened that's an entire state. If I felt this on like a local level with my town, it's like I'm just imagining the trauma, the pain that is like coming up everywhere with this laws that are changing. This is why Pride and these conversations is so important, is for our voices to be heard and validated.
We may be part of the queer community, but we can never represent all of the queer community. And I think that's coming through so clearly in conversation with you, that you're aware of that. And I think that's really important. Even for me, as someone living outside of Canmore, it's so interesting to hear about this maybe growing discourse in support of forgive and forget or whatever. Because if I think of the name Valbella, I will never go there for as long as I live, unless I hear from members of the community living in that town that things are changing or work is being done. So why is it it's never going to happen for me, who is actually part of the community that is affected and directly at the center of this, but for others, they're telling us that we need to just get over it.
Like I said, I'm huge for redemption, for second chances. What it takes for me is genuine apology and change. Like a genuine apology that says, I effed up, I'm going to change this. And if I saw that, like, I'd be the first person like that would be by their side helping.
And I think another thing too is, while we educate, recognizing that we're not the sole authorities and that we're learning just as much from one another, from other people that we talk to every day. Learning is not something that is just finished once you get the degree, like I'm hoping to. The work that you are doing, I really hope you recognize how important and special it is, especially if there is a business that's a little questionable with its intentions, and so openly so. The fact that you're there with your wife in the community, carving this space that is everything Valbella isn't, I just can't commend you enough for it.
It's important to like for me to hear those messages, and I just appreciate your words so much, because I do see and I feel in this moment like what it has been to like be sharing my voice and doing what we're doing. Like it's important to me, and it's not like I'm gonna stop, but it's hard. Like it's taking a toll.
We don't have to conquer the world in one day. We just have to do our best every morning when we wake up, and it sounds like you've been doing that for a long time. You know, I signed up for a conversation about donuts and the mountains, and I got more than I ever imagined possible. It's just been so wonderful to chat with you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for giving me the time. Like it's really cool to be a part of what you're doing here, and I look forward to continuing with you and just seeing where you go. And again, I just thank you for creating space for stories and conversation, because I think it's so important in the world.
Well, thank you. And you know, the same goes to you. With two businesses, your time is exceptionally valuable. So I'm really glad that we got to chat today. You should send me a photo of Frankie so that I can include her in the video, because she's the star. She's the star.
I will, for sure.
As we sign off, would you mind maybe sharing your social media or anything that you would like viewers and listeners to be able to find you on?
Yeah, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook. Frankie D's Donuts. So it's FRANKIEDS Donuts, DONUTS.com.
Perfect.
And because it's named after Frankie D. So it's Frankie D's Donuts. And then you can head to our website, which is the same, Frankies Donuts.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Queer and Alberta. Just what a fantastic episode with Makaylah. And I know I'm definitely going to have to head out to the Bow Valley soon just to try some donuts and to meet them, Frankie, and their wife in person. Expect a few more episodes coming up more regularly. And that Story Hive season will be released on September 19th, so that is 7 more episodes to look forward to. Now, my friends, wherever you are listening from, whether it is in the small towns in Alberta or somewhere else across the big wide world, I just hope you are feeling loved, seen, celebrated, and proud for who you are today. Until next time, mwah, I'll talk to you soon.